I still remember how ordinary that evening felt when it began. The kind of unremarkable weekday night where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen, where your biggest concern is whether your favorite hoodie is clean enough for tomorrow, and where the simple routine of carrying a laundry basket through a quiet apartment building feels almost meditative because it gives your mind a break from everything else. I live in a mid-sized apartment complex that looks calm from the outside, but always carries an invisible tension inside. A place where neighbors recognize each other without really knowing each other, where doors close quickly, and where shared spaces feel less communal and more like silent battlegrounds of unspoken rules and passive-aggressive expectations. The laundry room sits in the basement, tucked behind a heavy metal door near the storage cages, and stepping inside always feels like entering a forgotten space. Because the lighting is dim and yellowed, the ceiling is low, and the air smells like a mixture of detergent, dust, and damp concrete that never fully dries no matter how many machines are running. There are only two washers and two dryers for the entire building, which means every laundry day comes with the anxiety of timing, patience, and hoping no one decides your clothes have overstayed their welcome. Something I learned the hard way months earlier when I left briefly and returned to find my wet clothes dumped carelessly onto a scratched folding table as if they were an inconvenience rather than someone else's property. Because of that experience, I had already decided that this time I would stay in the laundry room while my clothes washed and dried, not to loiter or relax, but simply to protect the small sense of order I could control in an otherwise unpredictable building. So I loaded the washer, fed it coins, watched the lid lock, and leaned against the wall while the machine churned loudly, the sound echoing through the basement in a way that made time feel slower. When the wash cycle finished, I transferred my clothes into the dryer, started the timer, and sat down on the only plastic chair in the room, a slightly crooked chair with one uneven leg that wobbled just enough to remind you it had survived years of neglect. And as I sat there scrolling through my phone with one earbud in, listening to the steady hum of the dryer, I felt completely invisible, which was exactly how I wanted to be. That sense of quiet invisibility shattered the moment the laundry room door slammed open so hard that it bounced off the wall, the sudden noise making my heart jump as a woman stepped inside with a kind of rigid confidence that suggested she was already irritated before she even saw me. She was in her mid-50s, dressed neatly as if she treated every errand like an inspection, her posture stiff, her mouth set in a permanent line of disapproval, and I recognized her instantly as the woman from the first floor who was known throughout the building for policing behavior that wasn't hers to police, whether it was how long someone parked in a shared spot or how loudly they closed their door. She froze when she noticed me sitting there, her eyes narrowing as they moved from my face to the machines and back again, and the silence stretched uncomfortably before she finally asked, in a sharp and accusatory tone, what I was doing down there. As if the answer wouldn't be obvious to anyone standing in the laundry room, I told her calmly that I was doing my laundry and waiting for it to finish, gesturing toward the dryer that was still spinning behind me. But instead of accepting that explanation, she frowned and said I didn't need to sit in there, as if the chair itself was a privilege I hadn't earned. I explained that I had experienced people touching my clothes before, and that I preferred to stay nearby, expecting that basic reasoning would end the conversation. But instead she crossed her arms tightly and said that the laundry room wasn't a place for people to hang around, adding that it made others uncomfortable, even though she was the only other person in the room. I could feel irritation building, but I kept my voice steady as I told her I lived in the building, that my clothes were actively drying, and that I wasn't bothering anyone. But she stepped closer, invading my personal space, and said the words that changed the entire tone of the interaction when she muttered that people like you shouldn't be loitering in shared spaces. That vague phrase hung in the air, heavy and intentional, and I stood up slowly, not to challenge her physically, but to create distance, telling her firmly that I wasn't loitering and that I was using the laundry room exactly as it was intended to be used. She stared at me for a moment, her expression shifting from irritation to something colder and more resolved. And then she pulled out her phone and announced that she was calling the police, as if she had been waiting for an excuse to escalate the situation all along. At first, I genuinely thought she was bluffing, because the idea of calling the police over someone sitting in a laundry room felt absurd. But when she began dialing, and speaking loudly enough for me to hear, describing me as a suspicious individual who was lingering in the basement and refusing to leave, my disbelief turned into a tight knot of anxiety in my chest. I considered walking away, but the dryer was still running, and the thought of leaving my clothes unattended while she stood there watching made me feel exposed and powerless, so I stayed, standing near the machine, focusing on my breathing as she stepped outside the room to continue her call. Her voice echoed through the stairwell as she exaggerated every detail, using words like unsafe and concerning while painting a picture that had nothing to do with reality. And with every sentence she spoke, I became painfully aware of how easily ordinary behavior could be twisted into something threatening by someone determined to control a space. When she came back inside, she positioned herself near the door, watching me closely as if I might suddenly justify her accusations, while the dryer continued its steady rhythm, completely indifferent to the tension filling the room. After several long minutes that felt stretched by adrenaline and uncertainty, the sound of footsteps echoed down the basement stairs, followed by the arrival of the police officers, whose expressions immediately showed confusion at the quiet scene in front of them. One officer asked what was going on, and she jumped in before I could speak, pointing at me and claiming I had been sitting there doing nothing, refusing to leave, and making her uncomfortable, while I stood silently holding my laundry basket, waiting for my turn to speak. When the officer asked me if I lived in the building, I calmly gave my apartment number and explained that I was waiting for my laundry to finish. And as he looked at the running dryer and then back at her, his posture relaxed slightly, as if the entire situation was already answering itself. He asked her if my clothes were in the machine, and when she admitted they were, he explained patiently that residents are allowed to wait for their laundry, and that sitting in a shared space while using it is not illegal. She protested, insisting that it was creepy and inappropriate, but the second officer stepped in and clarified that discomfort does not equal criminal behavior, and that emergency services should not be used to resolve personal disagreements. At that exact moment, the dryer buzzed loudly, cutting through the tension, and I opened it, folding my clothes slowly and deliberately, my hands still shaking as the officers apologized to me for the inconvenience and reminded her of the proper use of police resources. She stormed out of the laundry room without looking back, her frustration echoing in her footsteps, while I gathered my folded clothes and walked upstairs, feeling emotionally drained despite having done nothing wrong. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, replaying every moment of the incident in my head and realizing how quickly normalcy can collapse when someone decides you don't belong. That night changed the way I viewed shared spaces, not because I was afraid, but because I understood how important it is not to surrender your right to exist quietly, just to keep someone else comfortable. The next time I did laundry, I sat in the same chair again, listening to the same buzzing lights and humming machines, aware that sometimes the strongest form of resistance isn't loud or dramatic, but simply continuing to occupy the space you are legally and morally allowed to be in, even when someone else desperately wants you gone.